What's going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and I am here today making this video because there's a couple articles that I want to go through because I think it has important information. They have important information, context, and perspectives from other people, even some perspectives and stuff that I don't agree with, but it's information and perspective and context, and I wanted to give it to you guys. So the first one comes from someone who you guys know that I very much disagree with on a regular basis, Kyle Krabs. Why the Washington Redskins are a Dolphins fan's best hope. So, by the way, before I begin, let's just note that I disagree with it, and it's ridiculous for the same reason why I disagreed with this whole approach that we've taken thus far, because there are so many, uncertain things that they're betting on that could go wrong, and we've already seen wrench after wrench after wrench get thrown into the cogs. So I just don't know why anybody thinks that logically or even probably probability wise, I don't know why people think that this whole effort is going to be some glamorous ascension to greatness at some point, and it's because it's not. And we continue to see how it unfolds, and every time, and Tua Tagovailoa's hip injury is the biggest one now, and that's what everybody's talking about. How does it affect the draft and blah, 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 right? But we've seen that, it's just when that wrench gets thrown in, it's just a chaotic mess of scrambling around to figure out what the next, vague, unclear plan is going to be, right? So let's continue on, though. Let's actually get through this. The Miami Dolphins' objective coming into the 2019 NFL season was to position themselves to draft a quarterback. The team has successfully done so, trading for 3 first-round picks and tearing their roster down to the studs in order to hit restart across all fronts. Now, real quick, I don't think that was anywhere close to necessary. Obviously, a lot of people do, but that is what they did. And theoretically, they have successfully set them up by giving themselves a bunch of draft capital and blah, blah, blah. But I think, as you guys know, for the many reasons I've stated, which we'll get through some as we get through this, it's going to be a massive failure. But some fans have been told that the only way the Dolphins season is a success is if the team lands the #1 overall pick in the 2020 NFL Draft. And with the Dolphins sporting 2 wins through 10 games, they're at least 2 games out of that spot and trailing the Cincinnati Bengals, another team in dire need of a quarterback. None of this would be all that problematic if Alabama quarterback Tua Tagovailoa hadn't suffered a dislocated hip last week, which also is accompanied with a fracture, an injury that is something of uncharted waters for young quarterback prospects looking to enter the NFL. Tagovailoa is now not even assured to enter the 2020 NFL Draft based on his personal decision on the matter. Where does that leave the Dolphins? On the outside looking in? Not necessarily. The Dolphins, should they happen to fall in love with LSU's Joe Burrow, do have one hand left to play, but they'll need some help from the Washington Redskins. You see, Washington currently sits at 1-9 on the season, 1 game ahead of the 0-10 Bengals, and Washington's strength of schedule is worse than that of the Bengals, meaning if the two teams tied for the worst record, the #1 overall pick in the NFL Draft would go to Washington at this point in time. That development would allow the Dolphins to leapfrog the Bengals after winning their way out of contention for the top pick themselves. And if any team in the NFL had the ammunition to jump up to the top spot, it would be Miami. Again, I mean, the plan for the Dolphins and for this front office is literally just, we're going to hope and wish that, everything turns out exactly how we would like it. They're literally hoping for their most ideal situation and have no plan B, and it's just okay, well, whatever. Let's see. And if any team in the it would be Miami. This isn't to say a trade up is definitely the way to go or an ideal scenario. It would actually be a terrible scenario. And also, he's not even including it has yet to happen, but first of all, I mean, that's a lot of hopes and wishes right there, that we have to rely on other teams to win or lose, so that way, blah, blah, blah. Now, that happens a lot with the playoff picture and so on and so forth, but at the end of the day, it's never good when a team has to rely and a fan base has to rely on another team to win or lose based to get us into the playoffs or something like that, it always sucks because you're always worrying and about another team, not your own. And especially too if you're banking on a team that's not very good, if they're an underdog, right? There's a lot that goes into that. And it's just not a good philosophy to use as a plan and a method for how you're gonna get things done to meet the goals that you want to meet, right? So trading up would be a terrible scenario, but that also doesn't include the fact that we could still win some games and our positioning could be hurt more. Currently we have the number 4 pick. Pittsburgh's pick is number 16, and Houston, they won last night and are now 7-4. Their pick is at 25th. So let's continue on with what Kyle Krabs has to say. But it definitely is one worth considering should all parties involved proceed according to plan. Okay, so first of all, again, this grand plan all depends on whether these other teams follow the grand plan. So that's a terrible way to bet your future to begin with, but also it's not one worth considering because again, and especially if the Steelers definitely have super winnable games going forward, the Texans are expected to continue to win games and make it to the playoffs by winning their division, and so our picks, and we definitely, as I mentioned before, definitely have winnable games. So if we do manage to squeak out another couple wins, this also actually does really rely on the Dolphins losing out as well. But we could get a win against the Bengals. We could get a win against the Jets. We could get a win against the Giants. Potentially even Sunday against the Browns. Although I don't think that's likely. I think that's a game we're probably going to end up losing, if I'm being completely honest. I'll get into more of that in my preview video, of course, but there's definitely winnable games for us, especially against one of the teams that's competing, or a couple of the teams really that are competing for that top top pick. And that's the Giants, who are currently picking at number 3, one ahead of us. The Bengals, obviously, who are picking at number 1. The Jets, who are currently picking at number 5, right? So there are some of these teams are now, the Jets pulled off 2 consecutive wins. And they had some really good games. Yes, one of them was against the Redskins, but they do appear to be trying to win. The Redskins are trying to win. The Giants are trying to win. All these other teams are actually trying to win. They just so happen to either be like a mix of bad. Well, they're all a mix of bad. Internal conflicts within the organization, as well as, injuries, right? So there's a lot of factors that have caused these teams to be that bad. Like I don't think Andy Dalton's particularly that good, and I think they've needed to move on from him for a while now. But, Andy Dalton's been injured, and so is AJ Green for them and stuff like that, right? So, and we know the Jets were massively injured, blah, 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 blah. So, yeah. But none of the other teams, without question, jettisoned their entire roster to intentionally be bad. Okay? They just happened to be bad, and then, ended up in this lottery, if you will, to get the number 1 pick, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so there's a lot riding on it, and there's a lot of just little unknowns that could completely derail this. So that's a terrible way. But again, trading up would not be the way either. So if we end up, right, so if right now the Pittsburgh pick is 16th overall, but what if they win some more, which they will, they get some more wins, right, and their pick drops to late teens or early 20s. Remember, too, there were so many people that were before, when the Steelers started out very early in the season, when we still had 10 plus games left to play, everybody was or a lot of people were oh, the Steelers pick's definitely going to be a top 5 pick. So awesome. The Dolphins clearly won this trade with Minkah Fitzpatrick. And now we're all, or, you know, those same people are just hoping that the Pittsburgh pick doesn't end up mid-teens or later. But at this point, it actually could very well end up not just mid-teens, but late teens, early 20s. The Houston pick is almost assuredly going to be in the mid-20s. Okay, and if the Dolphins do end up winning a couple more games, right, because this coaching staff is really trying so hard, and the players certainly are, and they could certainly overcome some bad teams down the stretch, to get some wins. But if they do and our pick drops out of the top 5, or, you know, I mean, right now Detroit is at 10 and they have a record of 3-6-1. Okay, so it wouldn't even take that much to drop out of the top 10. We have 2 wins, they have 3, right? The Arizona Cardinals are 3-7-1, right? So if we got the 3 wins, 4 wins, right, we could easily drop to the bottom the bottom end of the top 10, right? So, and now we still have to wait and see how that all goes. But, I mean, unless the entire team just comes out and straight up throws games. Although, again, you know, I think there's enough evidence to suggest that the coaching staff is certainly involved in making things as difficult as possible on this team to be able to win. But, you know, unless they did that, I mean, we could win some games. Anyway, so it would be terrible if we end up trading, you know, a bunch of our first round capital to go up and get a quarterback. But we know it's almost assuredly the fact that we're going to take a quarterback high in this draft, because that is what was set down by Stephen Ross. Anyway, again, still have to wait and see. None of that is set in stone yet. But there's too much mystery there for me to be bought in. Let's see. The plan is simple. Cincinnati has to win a single game and Washington has to lose out. So really, like, I mean, it's unlikely that, you know, the Bengals are going to go 0-16. It's really hard to actually do that, even if you're trying, right? So there is a good chance that they could squeak a win somewhere. But I don't know. I mean, we'll have to wait and see. But again, and then that also requires Washington to lose out. So you're depending on 2 teams, not just Washington. He's saying we depend on Washington to get that number 1 pick or high enough, right? But no, we actually are betting on the Washington Redskins and the Cincinnati Bengals and the Dolphins to lose out as well. So this equation relies on us and 2 other teams. It's absolutely ridiculous. The combined record of Washington's final 6 opponents, 29-30-1. The Giants and Lions are combined 5-14-1. Cincinnati's final 6 opponents, 27-33. Take the 9-1 Patriots out of the equation, 18-32. Let's go get us a win, Cincinnati. I mean, like, the things that, like, at what point are people going to run out of, like, plan, you know, double Z? Right? Because literally at this point there have been enough like wrenches thrown into the cogs that, you know, plan A's gone, plan B, C, D through Z. We've had to double back and go through the alphabet again. So now we're at like double Z. That's a little extreme. That would take a lot of combinations to get there. But my point is like, how many like crazy alternate plans do we have to come up with before we realize that this whole thing is going to be like just the most most epic disaster ever? Anyway, let's continue on though. So let's go to this article from ESPN that connects all of this. How Tua's injury could affect Dolphins 2020 NFL draft plan. Miami Dolphins fans have spent the 2019 NFL season dreaming of Tua Tagovailoa, the talented Alabama quarterback who many had projected as the number 1 overall pick for much of the season. But one devastating, dislocated, and fractured hip injury has thrown that hope into flux. Tagovailoa's season-ending hip injury has significant influence on the Dolphins' pursuit of a franchise quarterback. Is the Tua dream over for Miami, or does this somehow make it even more obtainable? With the Dolphins, and anyway, this is kind of a longer article, so I'll only make my points when it's necessary. With the Dolphins spending most of this year collecting 3 first-round selections and a projected 14 total picks, the 2020 NFL Draft might be the single most important event in Miami's extreme rebuild. I actually do agree with that. I think this draft and how they handle it and what they decide to do is going to be enough to determine whether or not they are going to be able to get this right in the long term. And now there's debate whether Tagovailoa will declare early for the draft by the January 20 deadline or return for a senior season at Alabama. If Tagovailoa declares, he ranks number 13 on ESPN Scout, incorporated into Todd McShay's latest big board as the third quarterback behind LSU's Joe Burrow and Oregon's Justin Herbert. Medical impact from Tua's injury. Tagovailoa, 21, underwent surgery on Monday to repair a dislocated right hip and posterior wall fracture, which is different than Bo Sanders' injury based off of the information we know. Now, to be clear, and also the doctor who talked about this on YouTube or whatever, I will post that video again in the description box of this video because he gave a massively good explanation of Tagovailoa's injury and Bo Sanders' injury, which is similar, but he explains that although we didn't have the same technology back then and so on and so forth, based off of the information at hand, like for instance that Bo Sanders was actually able to continue playing and supposedly pop it back into place, whereas Tagovailoa couldn't put any weight on it whatsoever, shows a pretty significance in an injury and why he thinks that Bo Sanders was a subluxation as opposed to which just essentially means a partial dislocation. There was no fracture based off of what he believes. Obviously, he doesn't know this for 100%, but based off of, his expertise in the medical field and the information he had, again, it's pretty substantial that he was actually able to continue doing stuff on it and supposedly pop it back into place, because that's what he had said at the time. He popped it back into place and kept going, right? So that's huge. That's a big thing. But so let's get into this though. Dr. Lyle Kane, a top hip specialist who performed the surgery in Houston, said afterward Tagovailoa's injury prognosis is excellent and that he's expected to make a full recovery. So that is good for sure. It's a serious and rare injury on the sports spectrum, but there is some early optimism. It's a freak type injury. It's what we call a high energy injury, meaning you're more likely to see something like this in a motor vehicle accident. So let's just pause really quick right there. And that's something that the other doctor said too in the video that I'm going to post. I forgot his name, but you can look at that video yourself. He said the same thing. He said that this is something you would see, especially with the fracture, and that's why part of why this makes it so much more complicated and potentially a lot riskier to his long-term career, right? Because the force was so strong that it correlated to an injury you would see in a high impact car accident, right? That's intense, right? But let's continue on. ESPN injury analyst Stefania Bell said, so that's whose quotes I'm reading to you right now. It's painful, it's traumatic. The best news is the specialist who operated on Tagovailoa and sees these things far more often than most orthopedic surgeons doesn't anticipate any long-term consequences and thinks that he has an excellent chance at a full recovery once the fracture heals. So that is good news, right? But with that and his 2 ankles, to me, the injuries are far too problematic considering the fact that he plays a high contact sport. He's already undersized a little bit for a quarterback, and then especially if he goes into a situation in Miami where our trenches our offensive line is essentially non-existent. He would get destroyed behind that offensive line and almost guarantee that he's going to re-injure it, right? And that doesn't even include the possible long-term degradation of the hip and the surrounding tissue and stuff because of the fact that and they explain this, she does, or one of the doctors does in this, and in that video, how when you have these kinds of injuries, it'll tear at the blood vessels and the arteries and stuff that get blood to that area. And then you won't be able to get the blood to the area, and then you'll start losing tissue and cartilage in there because it'll just die out. Kane told ESPN football analyst Laura Rutledge that Tagovailoa will be on a partial weight-bearing plan for 6 weeks to let the fracture heal, and then in 3 months he can resume athletic training, and by the spring he can begin throwing again. But there are months of rehab ahead in order to get back to full health. Bell says much of Tagovailoa's recovery after the fracture heals will center on healing the trauma to the soft tissue caused by the injury, restoring strength to the muscle around the hip joint, and increasing the range of motion after initially restricting it as the fracture heals. They don't go into it as detailed as in the video, so make sure you check out that video to see it's some kind of I can't remember the exact medical term. I'm sorry. I'm not a doctor and I'm not great with those kinds of things. So, but it's some kind of necrosis where, all the stuff around it dies out because the blood flow is incapable of getting there at that point due to the damage done to the surrounding blood vessels and arteries and so on and so forth. You want to restore normal strength and function, but also prevent against a future occurrence, Bell said. It's much harder to dislocate the hip. So unlike the shoulder, you don't really worry about it repeating as much, which is good, except he also does have, fracture history there now as well. And he is, a smaller guy. And so and he plays a high contact sport. Yes, they do favor the quarterback a lot, but if he has a, bad offensive line like he's almost assured to have, especially if he's taken in the 2020 draft by the Dolphins, then that's problematic to say the least. And frankly, he would be smart to not go to a team like that because, he should know the substantial possibility that he could end his career off that. If he hopes to come back from this to begin with, and not have a career-ending injury, it would be smart of him not to go to a team that is, not going to be able to protect him, right? Despite many connecting Tagovailoa's injury to Bo Jackson's career-ending hip injury, Bell says the specific natures of the injuries are quite different, and there's not much to compare there. That's based off of the explanation given by the other guy. That's true and not true. I'll let her finish though. At the time of Bo's injury, the severity was not fully appreciated. That is true, and like the other doctor said, that obviously the technology wasn't the same, so on and so forth. It was hard to know how much trauma happened inside his joint. He continued to be up and about on it, and there was more damage done, Bell said. Okay, yes, but that goes to show you though. Yes, that there was potentially more damage done, but based off of what doctors understand about how these injuries work, if he had a full dislocate, and this is what the other doctor explains, if he had a full dislocation, especially with a posterior fracture that compromises the integrity of that joint, then there's no way Bo Jackson would have been able to get up, supposedly pop it back in, and then continue playing on it, and then, go on with his life and walk around and stuff, thereby being able to create further damage. But even that further damage wasn't still to the extent that Tagovailoa's injury is on initial injury, right? So in a sense, it's not comparable because Tagovailoa's injury, based off of the information we have, that shows that it's far more significant. Now, the technology is better, and they were able to set it quick, right? And everything like that. They were obviously able to get to it fast, which is great, and all of that, and that improves his chances. But his injury is, based off of the information we have, is quite worse than Bo Jackson's is. So there's some comparisons you can make. and some that show that, you know, his is worse. Anytime you have trauma to the hip, including a dislocation or subluxation, it's natural to worry about the blood flow because those arteries are so critical to the health of the hip. Now, real quick, stop there. So that's what the other doctor in that YouTube video explains, is that he believes that Bo Jackson's was a subluxation, which is not a full dislocation. It's a partial dislocation where the ball of the hip joint, or the ball of the hip, comes out of the hip joint but still makes contact with the ring of the joint, and there's no suspected, based off of his, you know, his expertise in the field, he doesn't believe that there were any kind of posterior fractures as well, complicating the situation, right? So that's the first thing. So that's one of the key differences, or some of the key differences in their injuries, is that it's believed that Bo Jackson's was merely a subluxation, whereas Tagovailoa's is a full dislocation, but it's not simply because the ball popped out of the joint, but it's because the ball pushed through the back posterior wall, or the back wall of the joint, causing the joint itself to break, causing that posterior fracture, and thereby, you know, compromising the integrity of the joint itself, and then causing further damage to the tissue and the arteries surrounding it, thereby increasing the possibility that there could be that level of necrosis to the muscle and tissues around the joint and around the hip in the future. There's an increased possibility of that because of the level of injury, but then there was a little bit of mitigation of that risk because of how fast they were able to set it. But there is still a substantial possibility that it could happen again, the injury could happen again, or that he could have that, you know, that degradation over time in that area based off of lack of blood flow and so on. In Tua's case, he got the injury recognized quickly, reduced quickly, that's what I was trying to say, not set, but reduced quickly, and got a top specialist working on it. Okay, so real quick, one of the keys there that works in his favor is that it was reduced quickly. But at the same time, and it's also good that he had a top specialist, but how many times do you see top specialists getting it wrong? I mean, it's not uncommon that top specialists get it wrong. Now, again, the technology is far better than it used to be, and it is good that it got reduced fast and all that stuff, but let's not frame it in a way that makes it seem like it's a virtual guarantee, and that's how a lot of people are viewing this. And I was so right. Omar Kelly, of course, still said, you know, I would absolutely take him, blah, blah, blah. Like, look, man, he's just too much of a risk to take in the first couple rounds. Like, at this point, he should, if he even comes out in the 2020 draft at all, he should be, you know, a mid to late round pick at best, because of the significance of his injuries. And that would also depend on what kind of team he's going to. If he doesn't come out in the 2020 draft, then I would suspect he goes back to Alabama and plays there again. But then he's got to prove, and then maybe his stock could rise back up in the 2021 draft. But then he's got to compete with like Trevor Lawrence and blah, blah, blah. So, you know, he's got a lot to prove. I think it would personally, for him, I think it would be smarter to go back to Alabama, test it out there before you come to the hard-hitting NFL with the best of the best. Potentially going to a team where you're not going to have an offensive line, see how you recover and how you can play on it, and then also thereby potentially increasing your draft stock again. And getting yourself back up there to legitimately worthy of, like, you know, a solid first round pick or whatever. Even still, I think it would be too much of a flyer, especially with my philosophy of never taking one in the first or second rounds. You know, the best I might take Tua personally at this point would be the third round. But that would be the smartest thing for him to do. And there is still a substantial possibility that this could be career ending, certainly career shortening. Let's see. Early management really drives a lot of the prognosis. He's had everything in his favor, the best it could be at this point to have a full recovery, which is good. But even still, with our technology and science and medicine the way it is now, it's still no guarantee. I mean, it's not like I just watched the movie Elysium the other day where they have med beds where you lay down in it, it like scans you and then just like miraculously heals you with whatever it is, fractured bones, cancer, leukemia, whatever it is. You're just diagnosed and then healed. Our technology is not like that, right? So there is still, it's not perfect, right? So he might have gotten the best of the best, but that's why specialists can be wrong, because they give you the best estimate they can. It's not their fault. I'm not saying it's their fault, but everybody's different. Every injury is different. Technology plays a part in that, right? So we have to wait and see. But to me, it's too big of a risk at this point. Like I said, durability question marks were real for Tagovailoa even before the hip injury. The 6'1", 218-pound Tagovailoa had a tightrope surgery on each of his ankles and a right knee injury that have hampered him over the past 2 seasons. Nah, see, that's what I'm saying, bro. Both ankles, and I didn't even know about the knee injury till now. A knee injury and now this hip. That's like his entire lower body. Like, I mean, if he doesn't have a lower body, and besides that too, I'd also be really concerned about his future health, man, because, the NFL is brutal enough, right? Like, I don't want to see this dude end up like getting paralyzed or something because now he gets so fucking, beat up and playing on these injuries and taking massive hits that like he has some kind of like spinal cord compression or some shit, right? Like, that would be terrible. We don't want that, right? Anyway, but of course people are too greedy and too selfish. No, we just want Tagovailoa because he's supposed to be the best quarterback prospect despite all this stuff. It doesn't matter if he's an injury risk, blah, 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 blah. People go crazy. It's ridiculous. Anyway, what's your function? Let's see. But teams also look at how players recover from those situations. What's your functional return? Can you come back to prior performance? That is huge. That's why I said it's smarter for him if he decides to not declare in the 2020 and go back to school for another year. You could look at others who have devastating college injuries that clouded their draft prospects, like Willis McGahee and Frank Gore, who excelled in their NFL careers despite that. But let's also note they are outliers. Frank Gore is still going today, had 2 ACL injuries, 1 on each leg, on each knee. Surgeries, right? Still going. But he's a freak of fucking nature, takes care of his body, immaculately. Cameron Wake, another, but also takes care of his body immaculately, has the work ethic that to go along with it. Those guys are freaks of nature, and those guys are outliers. Outliers. So let's not bank on Tua Tagovailoa being an outlier. Working against the Dolphins. If Tagovailoa declares for the 2020 draft, but the Dolphins deem him too risky to bet their franchise on him, they could trim their quarterback options with their likely top 5 selection to Burrow and Herbert. Miami is still a strong contender. To draft a quarterback in the first round because they're going through another tank-like season is unlikely. First of all, at this point, it's actually quite likely that next year is tank-like for a number of reasons. Either it's because they were all on board with Tua and now that he's hurt or maybe won't declare, maybe they're going to intentionally be bad again so they can get a top prospect in next year's draft, maybe Trevor Lawrence, or because they've just so designed this team to be so terrible that they're gonna inevitably, because they have so many holes to dig themselves out of, that it's inevitably going to be another massively disappointing season, right? And especially too, because if we do somehow manage to squeak out a few wins, there's a potential then that we could actually regress in wins next year. It depends. There's a lot of things that go into it. Obviously a lot of mystery, right? But so, I mean, anyway, there's not... Everybody, a lot of people are talking about, next year as if we're all of a sudden not going to be bad and we're going to be competing. Like, that's insanity. Anyway, the Cincinnati Bengals remain Miami's biggest threat to the number 1 overall pick. If the Bengals deem Burrow to be a franchise-changing quarterback to replace Andy Dalton, the Dolphins' eye-opening war chest of picks won't be enough to convince them to trade back. If it was, that would be super devastating. Again, we shouldn't be doing that. If the Bengals draft Burrow, the Dolphins will have a choice among Herbert, an injured Tagovailoa, settling for Georgia's Jake Fromm, Washington's Jacob Eason, Utah State's Jordan Love, or Oklahoma's Jalen Hurts with any of their 3 first-round picks. Yes, and that also is, assuming that we're going to pick in the top 5 or banking that we could be picking in the top 5, blah, blah, blah. There's too much mystery and too many things that can make this go wrong. Anyway, this is a Dolphins team that has failed to right the quarterback position since Dan Marino retired in 2000. They have to nail this one, not settle for a player who could just have a decent Ryan Tannehill-like career in Miami. Okay, just real quick, because I've said this a million times, Tannehill is a really good, great quarterback. Is he elite? No. Will he ever be? Probably not. But he's a great quarterback, and he's proven with the Titans. Now he's 3-1 as a starter. And in 3 of those games, he had come from behind victories where he propped the team up on his own shoulders. But he shows that when he has a team around him, he can be a great quarterback. And furthermore, even his time in Miami, despite being the most sacked quarterback, despite all the changes at offensive coordinator and head coach, despite the fact that for the first few years of his career, he had a coach in Joe Philbin that didn't really, buy into him. In his later years, his owner didn't buy into him. He never had weapons around him, a terrible offensive line, all these things. Despite all that, he still had great production for us. He still had the mental fortitude and the physical fortitude to keep going in there. He's got the work ethic and the leadership. He's had the production. He's got the fucking records. He's got a ton of Dolphins records and an NFL record. But, people just don't live in fucking reality. It's astounding. So, Ryan Tannehill is not a bad quarterback, and they paint it like that. Settling for a player who could have just a decent Ryan Tannehill-like career. Really? It's fucking nonsense. And the Dolphins favor, and then they think that Tagovailoa, he could, but they think that he's going to somehow come out, and they want to call Ryan Tannehill injury prone because he had one unfortunate injury that he had no power over, but came back afterwards like a boss. But with Tagovailoa and his 2 ankles, his hip and his knee, people are like, nah, he's going to be good, man. He's going to come back and he's going to wow. People are they astound me in their stupidity. I'm sorry, but I just got to keep it real. In the Dolphins' favor, the Dolphins per ESPN's Football Power Index are projected to have the number 3, number 17 via Pittsburgh, and number 24 via Houston picks in the 2020 draft. As I said, we currently sit at 4, 16, and 25. But that's, I guess, what they're projecting when that time comes around and we actually pick. Making them the only team with 3 first-round picks. That draft flexibility gives Miami an ability to take more risks on draft weekend. Yeah, but this regime, Stephen Ross, Chris Greer, have overwhelmingly proven to take unnecessary risks and make stupid decisions. So we'll see how they work it. Concern about Tagovailoa's hip injury could make him available in the middle or back end of the first round, and the Dolphins might fall into an opportunity where they could select him with one of their other 2 first-round picks. Sure, you could, and I would say that's better than using your higher picks on him, but again, I don't think he's worth taking if he even declares in this draft, or even if it's not until, whether it's this draft or next draft that he declares. I don't think he's going to be worth, especially with my philosophy of never taking quarterback in rounds 1 or 2. I wouldn't take him at all above round 3, and that's still even pushing it for me because of the level of his injury history. This flexibility could allow Miami to select an elite talent at another position of need, such as edge rusher, Ohio State's Chase Young. I actually would really like that. Or offensive tackle, Georgia's Andrew Thomas, which would be a good pick. Or, in a radical move, select another quarterback with their top selection. A double-dipping move at the position like the Dallas Cowboys did in 1989 with Troy Aikman and Steve Walsh. First-round supplemental draft selection. Okay, so let's note a couple differences there. Notable differences. First, Steve Walsh was taken in the supplemental draft, so that's not the regular draft, right? So what he's talking about is different, and saying that we should use that we could use 2 of our first round picks in the actual draft to double dip on a quarterback. Yeah, you could do that, but that's also a massive waste of draft capital. Also, let's note, he says, double dipping move like the Dallas Cowboys did. They have a far better track record than we do of picking, especially in the first round. Okay, the best drafts we've had, whether people care to admit it, in the past 10 years are the Adam Gase drafts. Anyway. So yes, the Tua dream lives on, and depending on how his pre-draft medicals go, it could be more realistic than ever. This Dolphins franchise has a plethora of needs, so if they could address one of them with a top 5 pick and still get their quarterback in the future, even if they play it safe with Tagovailoa slowly rehabbing during the 2020 season, it could end up being a blessing in disguise. Heck, if they deem Tagovailoa will be healthy long term, taking him with their top selection still might be a win. Okay. We'll see. Tagovailoa's elite accuracy, playmaking ability, anticipation, ability to read defenses, and propensity to lead his team in big moments make him a rare and desirable quarterback prospect. With the major red flag of injuries. Okay. The future. The best hope is that Tagovailoa returns to full health and he has a long NFL career. Yeah, that's the best hope, but we don't live in a perfect world, and that is highly unlikely that he not only returns to full health, but then is capable of coming back, playing to that same elite status for the next 10, 15, 20 years. Like, really, guys? Come on. Like, you really think that after 5 years of him, taking, even if he was only sacked on average, like to the average, to the median of quarterbacks in this league. I mean, really? Anyway, the best, let's see. He was tantalizing to watch at Alabama, and it is easy to see him becoming one of the next great young NFL quarterbacks. It's also very early in the process with medical evaluations to be performed. A January draft decision by Tagovailoa to be made, and the play of other top quarterbacks to happen the rest of the season. But early observations show the Dolphins' pursuit for a franchise quarterback will be affected by Tagovailoa's injury, and it's not quite clear yet how it will work out for Miami. So look, I mean, again, I just think it's too much of a risk. There's too much, too many mystery, too many, anyway. So there's one more that I want to read to you, and this is, it's a Bleacher Report article talking about every team's worst decision of the year. And so this one plays to how the regime is making just terrible decisions left and right. And so, like, that's the thing. I mean, the list of decisions that they have made that have gone wrong and the failed, evaluations that they've done is massive already at this point. And then still somehow we expect them to fucking, get it right. The ones that they've hit on are few and far between, to say the least. And so we expect them to, anyway. Miami Dolphins, trading Minkah Fitzpatrick. The Miami Dolphins might have been too overzealous in the pursuit of a rebuild. There's perhaps no better example than how Minkah Fitzpatrick has played since Miami sent him to the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Dolphins received an offer they thought they couldn't refuse, as a 1st and 5th round pick in 2020 and another late pick in 2021 isn't a bad haul by any means, but Fitzpatrick is even better. The 2018 number 11 overall pick has 5 interceptions in 8 games with the Steelers, and that's just scratching the surface of what he's done. Meanwhile, the Dolphins have 6 interceptions on the year. The relationship between Fitzpatrick and the Dolphins might have been ruined, which is the Dolphins' fault, not Fitzpatrick's fault, which goes on the organization, the front office, and the coaching staff for systemically designing this team to be bad. That was one of his complaints. And on the coaching staff specifically for misusing him, which is all on them. Anyway, but that isn't a good enough excuse here. Trading a second-year, top 15 pick is silly, and it already shows. But let's also note, Robert Nkemdiche was a failure for them. Taco Charlton has been okay at best. Their first draft has been very underwhelming. Christian Wilkins underwhelming. Van Ginkel just came off IR. Gaskins has been inactive most of the year and underwhelming. Chandler Cox completely disappeared. Let's see. Minkah Fitzpatrick is balling for the Steelers. Kenyon Drake is now the leading running back in Arizona and balling out for them. Laramie Tunsil is killing it for the Texans. And Kenny Stills is also helping to contribute for that team and help them, on their run and doing the things that they're doing. Frank Gore is having, a good time there in Buffalo, right? Racking up some numbers, continuing his record-setting career. I mean, the list is massive. They don't have... I just don't know where people get this, confidence in these people. The evidence is overwhelming, right? Mark Walton was a bright spot, and now he's off the team. All of their AAF picks, all 8 of the players that they brought in from the AAF, the failed AAF league, not a single one of them's here. The player from Brazil didn't work. I think he's still on the practice squad, but really only because he's an exemption and we're allowed to have 11 guys there because of his status. Preston Williams goes down with an ACL injury. I don't know where people get the confidence. Anyway, that's what I got for you guys. Again, man, I just care about giving you the facts, data, the full context, different opinions and perspectives, even if I don't agree with them, and giving you the best analysis that I can possibly give. And then it's up to you guys to make the determination for yourself on what you think is, right. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and get up out of here. I hope you guys enjoy my videos and my perspective. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts for my videos. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comment section. And of course, as always, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Dillon Tartaro. And with that, I'm out. I'll see y'all soon. Fins up.